Hello, my name is Angela Davis, and I am a member of the Dole Institute Student Advisory Board, the official student group of the Institute. The Student Advisory Board is a bipartisan group whose members have access to exciting opportunities through their involvement with the Institute. This includes volunteering at evening programs and networking with our special guests. If you are a student and would like to join, please contact us by emailing dolesab@ku.edu. Welcome to the Dole Institute of Politics, and thank you for attending today's program. Today's program is live streamed, and the video is available on our YouTube channel. You can also access videos of past programs by visiting our YouTube channel at any time. After the program, we will have some time for the audience to ask questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand and I will come to you with a microphone. Please stand if you are able and just ask one brief question. The Dole Institute's mission is to foster civil and respectful discussion around important and often difficult topics. Please phrase your questions with this in mind. Before we begin, I'd like to remind you to please turn off your cell phones. And now, please join me in welcoming Director Audrey Coleman.
Thank you, Angela, for that warm welcome. Thank you so much, all of you who are able to attend this afternoon for our talk from Director Mary McMurray. It's going to be a wonderful experience. And for those of you who are watching online, we hope you enjoy it as well. We hope you will come to the Dole Institute and see our new exhibit, Missing Then Action, An Army Wife Speaks Out. It just debuted, just opened 2 days ago on Tuesday, June 14th, and is open during our visiting hours here at the Dole Institute, and we hope to see you there and appreciate the story of Kathleen Johnson. Today's program is held in conjunction with that exhibit, and we're really excited to help illuminate the experience and honor the service of military wives, spouses, and their families. Incidentally, Senator Elizabeth Dole has her own foundation dedicated to supporting military caregivers, spouses, and their families, so that connection is very important to us as well here at the Dole Institute. But I'm so pleased you all could be here, and I wanted to introduce our esteemed speaker, Dr. Mary McMurray, who's a historian who received her PhD from KU. She completed her dissertation on the topic of Army wives in the 20th century and is now the director of the Johnson County Museum, having had a wonderful, esteemed career here locally and around the state for many years. So we're so pleased she could be here with us. As I mentioned, the program is in conjunction with our exhibit debut, and I encourage you to visit the exhibit after the program. Mary, it's such a pleasure to turn the mic over to you. Thank you so much for being with us today.
And I believe I can use the mic on the lapel pin, is that right? Yes, wonderful. I'll turn that off and put it right here. Well, hi everybody. Thank you so much for having me here at the Robert J. Dole Institute for Politics. I've really long admired this institution, and you all know it for some incredible things, like Angela just shared us with the Student Advisory Board, and Audrey just shared with us the mission to promote political and civic participation. But I wanted to just take a little second before we jumped into Army Wives to tell you a couple reasons why I, in addition to that, love the Dole Institute. Way back in the day when I was teaching here at KU, I taught the History, Theory, and Methods class, a very well-loved and required course for all history majors. But the way I made it fun was to take the students on field trips, and one of the most popular field trips was to bring the students here, where the teams at the Dole Institute was willing to take them into collections, to show them archival work, and teach them how to make use of the incredible resources here. It's a great service you all provide to KU students, and I'm grateful to have been part of it. I'm a big fan of the education programs here. I started my career in museums and museum education, and we all know in museum education the best thing you can do is find great things that are being done out there and borrow those ideas from people. One of those great people is sitting in this room, Julie Clover, who I've gotten to know through the museum educator community, and if you ever have the opportunity to see what she did on YouTube during the pandemic, to bring the collections to life, or to participate in one of her programs, I could not recommend that more. So, big round of applause for Audrey Coleman and the team of professionals and volunteers that are working to make the Dole Institute such a great institution. So as Audrey said, I'm a historian, Mary McMurray, and I'm also the director of the Johnson County Museum, which is part of Johnson County Park and Recreation District. We're in Overland Park, Kansas, located in the Johnson County Arts and Heritage Center, which you see on the right of your screen. That's actually a former bowling lane and billiards hall and ice skating rink called the King Louis West. And today it's home to Theater in the Park, Johnson County Park and Recreation District's Fine and Performing Arts Department, public art, and some really incredible community partners. The museum is nationally accredited, that's brand new for us, and we're also celebrating our 55th anniversary. At the museum, we use lessons of the past to inspire, empower, and embolden people to help build the community they wish to see. Right now, we're featuring a special exhibit about the history of redlining, and that's open through January 7th. I couldn't encourage you all to come and visit it enough. We're located just 38.8 miles away from right here, where I'm standing right now. It was a lovely drive today. If you would like to visit, please know our hours are Monday through Saturday, 9 to 4:30. And if you'd like to visit for free, we are a Blue Star Museum, which is appropriate to say on this day. And we are also participating in Sunflower Summer. So come and see us for free if you can. All right. Well, when Audrey reached out to ask me to speak in conjunction with the Missing Then Action and Army Wife Speaks Out exhibit, I was so excited because I had seen this topic on a national scale before at the Dole Institute with the League of Wives exhibit. And then I was so excited to see the Dole diving into this important history. I was excited for the opportunity to learn more about Kathleen Johnson and the role the state of Kansas played in this history. And I was really excited to, for the first time in 5 years, to dust off my dissertation and share some of the things that I learned with you all. My dissertation really started at Enterprise Rent-A-Car, actually, because that's what all good history undergrads would do, is get a job at Enterprise Rent-A-Car. And I was driving two women from one location to another, and as I listened to them speak in the back seat of the car, I said, wow, you all sound like you've been friends forever. And they said, we're best friends. We fought the war together. And I said, oh, that's fascinating, because I had studied history. And so I was like, well, are you WACs? Are you WADES? Are you SPARs? They said, no, we were Army wives. What? They said, fight. Now, my drive was really short with them, and I didn't get to ask them, well, why did you say fight? But the question just kept running around in my head for years and years, and eventually took me away from sales and into the world of graduate school, where I had to try and find the answer. Why did they say fought? And to do so, I really had to understand a significant organizational and cultural change in the United States Army. From the period around World War II and before, when the old Army adage was, if the Army wanted you to have a wife, they would have issued you one, to 1983, when we're celebrating and supporting an interdependent relationship with families. You see, this is General Wickham, and he says, our goal is to increase the bonding between the family unit and the Army community, to create a sense of interdependence. It is not a we-they situation, it is us as in the US Army. The white paper that General Wickham wrote called on the Army to engage spouses in the development of policies and programs and was designed to ensure that the Army met its goal, quote, to increase the bonding between the family unit and the Army community to create a sense of interdependence. As Wickham said, the Army enlists soldiers, but it re-enlists families. If you do not take care of the family, you're not going to encourage the soldier to stay in. So we've got to deal concretely and institutionally and financially and programmatically with family matters. Now that's a really big change, right? From viewing families as unwanted dependents to acknowledging and fostering interdependence. And it happens in 40 years. Why? How? Who did it? Well, of course, people have studied this. Military historians are all over, and they have shared the history that General Wickham himself might have been part of the reason why we transformed the military into a family institution. Some people have looked at Ronald Reagan, the president at the time, and his focus on the family and said that was a reason why the Army transformed. Others looked at the needs of the transformation to the all-volunteer force and the need for recruitment that Wickham spoke about there. And all of those things probably had something to do with it, no doubt. But Wickham himself said interdependence, and that says that you're mutually dependent. Where are the wives? Where are the families? To find the answer, it turns out I had to go way, way back to the World War II period again. To when World War II was really a turning point for military families. There have always been women and wives who followed war. We'll hear stories of Martha Washington, for example, with the Continental Army. They were small groups of women, and when one senior officer's wife would pass the torch to another, they would pass down traditions and stories and help one another learn. But during World War II, families associated with the military grew exponentially. The U.S. Senate Committee on Military Affairs first started by suspending prohibitions limiting officers' rights to marry in 1942. And this leads to a flood of married people into the military, including my grandparents right there, Charlie Burns and Mildred Burns at Fort Polk in this time period. The relationship with dependents increased that summer when Congress passed the Servicemen Dependents Allowance Act that provided direct financial support to dependents. This is a serious financial commitment on behalf of the military. They provided $50 for this wife, at the time wives, $12 for the first child, $10 for each additional. Soldiers paid up to $22 from their paycheck, and the US government supplied the rest of that. So a huge financial commitment. The Army also created a personnel commitment by creating the Office of Dependency Benefits to administer the allowances. It was staffed by 10,000 people. It processed and distributed nearly 4 million family allowance checks each month. From October 1942 to August 1945, the ODB dispersed more than $13 billion, a huge effort with 10,000 staff just to manage the checks. How many staff do you think would be necessary to prepare spouses to support the mission and boost husbands' morale, as generations of wives have done before? Remember, these are spouses. You can't put them through boot camp. They're not in the military. So Army leaders needed a new method to train wives. And there's a man that goes on to some prominence in the military. At the time, he was a colonel. His name was Ira Eaker. And Ira Eaker says, I'm going to reach out to a seasoned Army wife and ask her to write a semi-official guidebook to help officers' wives. He finds that in this woman you see on the screen here, Nancy Shea. Nancy Shea was a very seasoned Army officer's wife. She had married a West Point grad, was married for 20 years, and she chose to take on the task of sharing what she called a definite set of rules to pass along. The product was The Army Wife, the book you see there, a pioneering guide that was first published in that time period that we're discussing right now. And it had hundreds of pages of social customs that were there to socialize wives into the militarized culture that they were getting to become part of. It was addressed to officers' wives, but I think it's important to note that it was really meant to shape the realities, expectations, and aspirations of all wives. The idea was that the officers' wives was something to aspire to. According to Shea, the handbook offered, quote, a clear account of what the Army may expect of the service and what the service expects of her. The book followed a chronological format from West Point and military weddings to death, with military protocol and procedures woven into literally every piece of advice. Advertised as a book that women want, that covers, quote, every problem of Army life, and would give new brides, quote, everything you need to know to assure your husband's success and your happiness. No surprise then that this book, in the middle of World War II, in the early years of World War II, became a national bestseller. It was broadly circulated, and by March of 1942, it was in its 5th printing. A wave of books aimed at military spouses follows after this and continues to today. So this manual, this book you see on the screen, was intended as a platform to shape wives into what the Army needed to meet the needs of war. But as I'm going to argue to you today, this book also, and the waves of sources that followed it, that focused on the Army officer's wife ideal, provided a platform for wives and spouses to shape the Army right back. So let's take a little bit of time and look and see what's in it. There's 2 things that run through every piece of advice, and I call it the foundational elements of the ideal, and that is mission readiness and morale. Now this might sound familiar to you because this is the foundational elements of all parts of the military as well. Readiness and morale are the most important things. So building on a tradition that dated back to Martha Washington, ideal spouses, according to Shea, would put the Army, its mission, and the soldiers' morale above all else. Shea and those who followed her used a combination of patriotism, guilt, and threats to persuade wives to follow those foundational elements and apply them to all parts of their life. The emphasis on readiness and morale in the ideal demonstrates how important it was for Army leaders and planners for wives to fall in line. The Army needed spouses to be all that it could be. Let's take a deeper look at those prescriptions for readiness and morale in action so you don't just have to take my word for it. First, mission first. As Nancy Shea says, It is unnecessary to state that all women with husbands, sweethearts, or sons in the Army will give their fullest support. It is natural that you would do this. Tying wives' compliance with the ideal to the success of their husbands, Shea went on to say, an Army wife must be successful if she is ambitious and wants her husband to wear stars on his shoulders someday. It wasn't all inspirational message. Some were also threatening and warnings. Here's one example. And in a section entitled The Unwritten Efficiency Report, Nancy Shea says, while officers have a written efficiency report filed in Washington, wives have an unwritten efficiency report that is unfiled but known, labeled and cataloged throughout your time in service. This unwritten efficiency report may be the means of bringing special assignments of honor to an officer, or it may deprive him of an enviable detail for which he has worked faithfully. The stakes are really, really high here. And this was not the last of such threats throughout the guidebook. By the way, they're my grandparents again, that's their wedding day. Okay, morale boosting. Our slogan must be the best for our fighting men, she says. Not just for the readers' husbands, but also for the Army itself. The morale in Army camps depends upon the women behind the men. To fight a war, men need guns, tanks, ships, planes. But to win a war, men need inspiration, courage, and hope. They need a sweetheart, a wife, for whose love and protection they will make the supreme sacrifice if called upon. In a chapter called Our New Citizen Army, Shea puts the responsibility for boosting morale solely on the wives. Shea likened the Army officer's wife to ability to achieve all that was being asked of her in the several hundred-page manual to being a circus rider, taking jumps. She says, just so must the Army wife take whatever comes. She must be able to take it. All this calls for courage, tact, self-control, philosophy, and above all else, a sense of humor. Without that last mentioned trait, Shea surmised she is sunk. Even in the event of their husband's death, Shea instructed wives to protect the Army system and the morale on base. In a section entitled Army Etiquette Towards Persons in Grief, Shea provides guidance to maintain a positive morale. In Army circles, when death occurs, there is no outward display of mourning, except in the observance of the military customs of service. There are no drawn shades, no crepe-hung doors, muffled bells, or hushed voices. Despite the deep sorrow of the family of the deceased, there is a certain spirit. This is possible because, as Shea noted, idealized wives knew that death is accepted as an inevitable happening, and post-life goes on in an uninterrupted manner, except during the actual funeral service. Oh, I skipped a slide. There we go. So, let's talk a little more deeply. Examples of morale boosting and readiness in the advice. It's World War II, so we're going to talk about housing. Because housing during World War II was a real struggle. First of all, there was a national housing shortage that started in the Great Depression that the war only exacerbated. And then for World War II era Army wives, they're moving quite often. There's severe housing shortages, especially near military bases. Their accommodations are often makeshift. There's huge spikes in prices, including people gouging people. And all of this exacerbated the problems that civilians faced for Army wives who are following their spouses from camp to camp. The Army provided little assistance to the wives of servicemen seeking homes near their husbands, further complicating Army wives' struggle to find affordable housing. Even with all of this, Shea treated housing shortages in a cavalier way. Here's two quick examples of many. In a page-and-a-half section entitled Living Conditions in Army Boomtowns, Shea informs readers trailers or cardboard box houses might be the only available housing. This is not unusual, my dear, she says. In fact, that is the accepted way that most brides are beginning their Army marital careers today. Accepted by whom, I can't help but wonder. In the face of these many challenges, Shea claimed that an Army wife's ability to make a house a home would come naturally to her. Army women do have a knack of being able to do these things, and also to make a home out of a teepee, a nippa shack, or whatever Uncle Sam assigns to their husbands as quarters. That knack included combining all the qualities of being a financier, a culinary artist, an interior decorator, these are all in her list, an expert in marketing and buying, the perfect hostess, a devoted wife and mother, a social success, and a woman who can make a second lieutenant's pay stretch to the nth degree without ever breaking. Shea dismissed the enormity of the task at hand with, "A pretty tall order, isn't it?" to end that paragraph. Indeed. Still, as she noted, most Army homes have an indefinable charm, a charm that reflects the personality of its present owner, regardless of shabby furnishings, bare walls, or lack of servants. So once you do have a home, whether it's a cardboard box or something else, no matter what the living condition, Army wives had to use their homes to boost morale, according to Shea. The only tragedy that upsets a seasoned Army wife is to be separated from her husband. An Army wife never complains. She smiles and hopes. No shortage or difficulty could excuse a wife's failure to make her home ideal and enjoy it. If Army wives could not create the morale-boosting homes the ideal demanded and the Army needed, there was only one reason: the wife had failed. Or, as Nancy Shea put it, do not expect Ted to help you with the dishes. He is working for the government. Despite all these difficulties, Shea glibly informed Army wives that there is something mighty attractive about being a camp follower. Readiness is also applied to the home, where Shea tells Army wives and mothers have a greater responsibilities toward their husbands and children. Because of that, they need to run their home like a business, an Army business. And just like an Army business, it should be built on a system that had efficiency, right? So the Army household is a business and the Army wife is the business manager. The keynote of her housekeeping should be efficiency. That efficiency requires systematic planning, she says, before encouraging readers to adopt a military practice of strategic planning for daily, weekly, and monthly schedules for housekeeping, marketing, and meal preparation. Makes perfect sense. And mission readiness and morale is also in the way that they're supposed to raise children, which, remember, is going to be really hard during wartime. In addition to supporting the mission and maintaining the morale and making Army living conditions home-like, you had to support the mission by raising patriotic kids who would do the same thing. Here's a list of 10 ways that you could do that in the military. Supporting the Army mission and boosting morale was clearly a family affair. Entertaining, a big part of the military, and the main focus of the guidebooks. Although Shea and her contemporaries said time and time again that simplicity was the keynote of the Army party, the advice she provided was a little more extensive than that. Within the entertaining chapter's 33 pages, readers would find a variety of prescriptions for proper social etiquette, including detailed instructions on how to receive and repay social obligations, how to properly arrive at and depart from a base, how to attend and host breakfasts, brunches, lunches, coffees, and all types of dinners, who to invite and where to sit them, what drinks to serve and who should serve them. Although there were no ranks among women, the ranking officer's wife president should be the one who's responsible for presiding over the tea table. And if you have a question on which outranks the other coffee or tea, the book will tell you that one, so you can know which senior wife should be supporting that. Furthermore, junior wives should always wait for the elders or ranking officer's wife to make her departure before leaving any Army gathering. This advice reinforced the very hierarchies that form the foundation of the Army order and discipline. Failure to adhere to social customs and expectations led to personal repercussions for readers. Again, there's threats in every chapter. As Shea told brides, your popularity will depend upon your poise, your charm, and your graciousness. The focus on these customs and courtesies were tied to the Army's need for them, I believe. Traditions inspire service, they inform actions, they help maintain order and discipline. Customs and courtesies also help build strong social relationships that lead to a sense of camaraderie and security amongst soldiers. Prescriptions for entertaining and being entertained reinforce demands that wives participate in the social side of the Army for the benefit of their husbands and the Army, not for themselves. They weren't having their party. Or as I like to say in my dissertation, it was the Army's party and Army wives couldn't cry even if they wanted to. So the ideal commanded wives to support Army readiness and morale through their dedication to making hospitable homes for Army officers, raising patriotic children, observing those customs and courtesies, and laboring in both paid and unpaid positions. The scope of the prescriptions reveal the extensive nature of dependence the Army had on officers' wives and enlisted wives who were encouraged to follow their example. But what was it really like? Did wives actually read this book? Did they throw it against the wall? Sometimes I would have thought they would have done that. But here I'm really lucky, I didn't have to guess. Instead, I got to find a resource, a treasure trove of oral histories that were conducted by military spouses for military spouses through the Army Family Oral History Project that's located just down the road at Fort Leavenworth. And I have to give a special shout out because I started by telling you all how amazing research librarians are. Let's give a shout out to Kathy Bucher at the Combined Arms Research Library at Leavenworth. She helped me find this source. The Army Family Oral History Project revealed time and time again that officers' wives who served during World War II both embraced and challenged this officer's wife ideal that was prescribed to them. It also showed that they read the book. During an oral history, Army wife Janie Arison was asked if she read The Army Wife, and she responded, "Oh, yes." When asked if she believed it, she said, "Oh, yes." When asked if she followed the advice offered in Nancy Shea's guidebook, she went on to cite two of the items listed in a list of 12 things, things you may or may not know about the Army. Officers didn't wheel baby carriages, didn't carry umbrellas, she said. "Are you serious?" her incredulous interviewer asked her. "Of course," she said. "It is written in the book." So, that's kind of the foundations of the ideal and how it's coming together. But the war ends, and what are we going to do after that? And what's happening to all these military people that have families that are coming with them? What are the expectations of them? Well, after World War II, there's a steady rise in the percentage of total active duty force who were married and had children. Between 1953 and 1974, the percentage of married military personnel increased 48%. More than the rate that occurred in civilian society. By 1960, the number of family members outnumbered the numbers of uniformed personnel on active duty. And those families were not just serving stateside. For the first time ever, they were also journeying en masse to stations abroad and living outside of the United States during the Cold War. So that's important as well. All of this leads to a huge new wave of prescriptive sources talking about the idealized Army wife, ready to inform wives of their responsibilities and the expanded needs they have to meet a changing Army in the Cold War. The wave included three revised editions of The Army Wife, 7 new manuals written by military wives and for military wives, and more than in the wartime editions of these manuals that are all fairly similar, although the authors probably wouldn't want me to say that, you would see intense pressure to procreate, increased standards of domestic responsibilities, and female subordination to their husbands and the family. This kind of will mirror what's happening in the civilian world, but more than that, the increased attention to wives' roles, responsibilities, and importance to achieving readiness and mission success during the Cold War revealed the Army's increasing dependence on wives to help them achieve their mission. In the face of domestic and international, real and imagined threats against the Army, wives' ability to embrace morale and embrace the mission and boost morale became even more important. Importantly, the guidebooks made it clear that wives were expected to adapt to constantly changing conditions and to thrive. They told them that the ideal could be changed and that they would change as conditions demand. Beyond the book, there's deeper engagement with the family that's happening. Politicians from Truman and Eisenhower and others are starting to have hearings about dependent and medical care, the Wary Act to alleviate housing shortages in 1949. 53, President Eisenhower from Kansas ordered a committee to review substandard housings. Operation Gyroscope, a program aimed at reducing attrition among career personnel by alleviating problems associated with military family, was launched in 1954. In 1956, Congress passes the Dependence Medical Act, the creation of the military health benefit. Colleges and universities are getting into this game of working with the Army officer's wife ideal. In the 1950s, you could take a GI wifehood course at a variety of universities. Within the Army itself, people are starting to engage more with the family. In 1965, Army Community Services Program was established, and it's considered the first attempt to establish a fully functional system for military services of military services for Army dependents. They also offered great courses like the Spouse Orientation and Leadership Development course, or SOLD, that was led by Army representatives acting in an official capacity to inform new wives of their roles and the expectations of them in service. As the rates of recurring deployments increase, programs like the Mobilization and Deployment Family Readiness and Family Advocacy Program assisted commanders in fostering readiness among the Army family team and disseminated resources to empower families and foster stability during times of deployment. You see this increasing level of military involvement also in the books. Eventually, by the 1960s version of The Army Wife, the dust jacket says it's written with the full cooperation of Pentagon authorities and has a semi-official status in the Army. In 1966, Nancy Shea included a new subchapter called The Indoctrination of Wives. So at least she was real honest about it. And it highlights Army-sponsored programs for wives, including orientation tours, lectures, films, all designed to brief wives on their various missions. The Army's reason for offering this was one of self-interest. The quote from Nancy Shea, "The Army understands that if the wife is informed and knows the score about her husband's work, she will have a positive attitude towards the Army and be a happier and more helpful wife." How lovely. The involvement of the Department of the Army, political and military leaders, and more in family affairs indicates this formalization is starting to happen in the relationship between spouses in the Army system in this period that I call Operation Advocacy. There's also a new publication you just saw pop up on your screen, and that's U.S. Lady magazine. It was started in 1955, and it vigorously promoted the military wife ideal to more than 30,000 monthly readers. In glossy images, they showed military wives enjoying lives at various bases around the world, editorials, fictions, advertisements. The monthly covers of U.S. Lady described wives as the better half of the military. And like the Army Wife, U.S. Lady was a private, for-profit venture with a semi-official status in the military. Due to its nature as a monthly periodical, it's something a little bit different than that kind of one-way street of, oh, I bought a book, I will receive your information, right? Now you have letters to the editors that get to come through. You have call and responses that are happening. So the U.S. Lady also served as a forum for wives to engage with military leaders and senior officers' wives. Throughout the 13 years that this magazine was published, U.S. Lady was a site for wives to ask questions and air their struggles about military life and expect an official response. It was a place for editors, military departments and leaders, fellow wives and others to educate wives on political and family members and encourage them to use their unique roles to benefit the military. And it was a place where wives were praised and rewarded for their work on behalf of their families, the Army, and the state. While promoters of the ideal always encouraged Army officers' wives to support their husbands, the Army, and the nation, defense cuts, missions around the globe, and Cold War threats demanded that post-war Army wives also defend the system in which they were increasingly being seen as partners. Those engaging with the ideal called on wives to contribute to foreign affairs, to protect and defend the Army from internal and external threats, while also maintaining homes, raising kids, volunteering, boosting morale, all for the good of the Army. Authors, journalists, magazine editors, military officials, and fellow military spouses writing for the magazine framed their calls for wives to work on behalf of the Army within the context of the foundational elements of the Army officer's wife ideal. So a lot had changed, but still, support the mission, boost morale is running through all of these. All of these shared sources that we've gone through here had the same messages to the wives. Their Cold War mission was to advocate for the military and the state. Or as Nancy Shea said it, we are no longer mere camp followers. Instead, she says we are integral parts of the Army team who are almost as much in service of the government as their husband. By 1966, Nancy Shea tells her readers the Department of the Army recognized their value and importance of their supporting role, and quote, "As an Army wife, never forget that you are a silent member of the team, but a key man. You belong to a strong team that has never lost a war, so take pride in the aims and ideals of the United States Army." They're not really sounding like dependents, are they, at this point? Here's a few examples from U.S. Lady magazine. Again, I told you they were regularly encouraging wives to stay well-informed of national and international news, and they also promoted wives' activism on behalf of the military. So they said, if it'll directly benefit the military, please get involved. Here's a couple of examples. Their Capitol Command Post, a regular column, provided readers with information about any proposed legislation pertaining to the military. Here's a quote. "Want to know who can get the bill passed?" The editors told the wives in 1957 about legislation regarding military pay. In all capital letters, they say, "You can." Far from serving in silence, U.S. Ladies readers were told to, quote, "talk about the plan with your family and relatives, military and civilian, both men and women." In March of 1959, legislators considered a variety of career service improvements, like including dependent medical care or more housing, promotion of World War II officers and survivor benefits. U.S. Lady writes in their pages, "Write Congress about your hopes and fears." Reinforcing their power in the political process, they said, "Help assure approval for the legislation by writing to Congress, and be a little dramatic in the letters, and a tear or two might help." Certainly something that they would only ask the spouses to do. In 1960, there was an article entitled "Inequality, Intimidation, and Initiative," where Navy wife Trudy James Sundberg endorsed U.S. Ladies' campaign to get out the military vote in the presidential election. She urges her fellow military spouses to become active in the democratic political process, and she bolstered her advice by noting that the Defense Department in numerous official statements, implored wives to become, quote, experts on politics and encourage their husbands to vote by helping them to keep politically informed. "Your vote does count, your opinions count, and you count," she says in capital letters. In 1964, when the military faced mounting criticisms related to the size of the military and its budget, U.S. ladies were asked to, "Ladies, take up arms in defense of your husbands." Although as they said, quote, "military men can seldom speak for themselves, properly informed service spouses," or wives, excuse me, at the time, "can do some speaking for them." They're using these people as agents of change. They're using them in a way that military members could not be used, right? And they're using them in the Cold War, too. This is one of the most significant modifications to the post-war prescriptions. Unlike their World War II counterparts, Cold War-era Army wives were expected to contribute to foreign affairs. So, as I mentioned earlier, wives are joining military members overseas en masse at this time. And in living in bases around the world, military spouses had this unique ability in the early years of the Cold War to represent the American way of life and to build goodwill for the United States in things like going to shopping for a rug or going on a tour outside of base. Texts aimed at Army wives called on them to be aware of their demeanor and interactions with local people, and told them that they represented the United States, and as such, their actions could affect foreign relations. The 1948 edition of the Army Wife says that wives have, quote, "tremendous influence overseas, and therefore played, quote, an integral part in representing the Army for good or ill." And Shea also tells her readers that the State Department recognized the impact wives could make abroad. By 1966, this escalates even more when she includes a chapter called the, quote, "National Security Team." She calls Army wives spokesmen for the United States and very much in service of the government. This is that same year that it becomes written with full cooperation of Pentagon authorities. This is giving a lot of power to spouses that were seen as dependents still at this time. Diplomacy abroad became fully entrenched in the Army officer's wife ideal, or as Shea said it, your principal job, besides making a home, rearing a family, and strengthening your husband's morale, is to help him make friendly contacts with the people among whom you are stationed. In U.S. Lady magazine, we see this as well amplified. U.S. Lady contained articles that presented wives' everyday activities as significant to the Cold War agenda. The magazine informed readers that by building personal relationships with people stationed abroad, they could have foster friendly relations and become an active part of the arsenal for democracy. Articles such as Teacup Allies and Cuisine Diplomacy highlighted wives' use of food to spread positive views of Americanism and capitalism. Other sections of the magazine included direct pleas for wives to engage in foreign affairs. Still others rewarded them for it. A May 1960 editorial featured Eleanor Roosevelt's visit with military wives who were studying how to combat communism at the Industrial College of the Armed Forces at Fort McNair. I get to quote Eleanor Roosevelt, that's always fun. "You have more knowledge than most of my audiences about this widening responsibility of ours. I hope I will have your help in solving some of these new problems associated with the Russians' impressions of capitalism." They also had rewards like U.S. Lady of the Month competitions, where they awarded an Army wife, or a military wife, excuse me, this high honor for something she did good on behalf of the military, and write up a several-page spread heralding this. They have articles celebrating efforts of individual wives and collective wives, and they have letters from high-level military and political leaders praising the actions that spouses take. Although it shifted the boundaries of the acceptable behavior of the Army officer's wife ideal, this activism was part of, not a challenge to, the prescribed ideal. In heralding wives for their advocacy and significance to the Army and its mission, and responding to issues real military wives praised, by heralding the work that soldier spouses did in furthering the mission, and including official recognition of those activities and grievances, imagining scenarios in which Army wives save the day, informing readers of news relevant to the military, encouraging activism, and more. U.S. Lady magazine broadened the boundaries of expectations for Army officers' wives and encouraged them to awaken their political consciousness. Those who engaged with the ideal in this era paved the way for recognition of a mutually dependent relationship between the Army and its families. Although wives were encouraged to change as conditions demand, as Shay said, the Army itself was slow to develop sometimes and adapt the services that were needed. When faced with the failures of the Army system to provide services and procedures to help wives achieve their missions, many wives challenged specific requirements of the ideal, Army officials, or the system to do better. But they never, ever, that I found, challenged the foundational elements of the ideal, the expectations that wives would support the mission and boost morale. Rather, they built on that foundation to improve their lived experiences within the system that they were part of. In encouraging and responding to wives' advocacy on behalf of their husbands, the Army and the state, cultural and military leaders created a forum and precedents for spouses to voice concerns about Army family policy and other matters that they encountered in order to improve the Army. The call for wives' advocacy on behalf of the military within the confines of the ideal set a course of activism that continued long after U.S. Lady and the Army wife stopped publishing. In fact, there's no more Army wives after 1966. Nancy Shay's husband retires and they promptly get divorced. Right? Okay. And that brings us to the era covered in the exhibit featured down the hall. An era when wives built on decades of calls for individual military wives to support the Army mission and morale, calls to advocate on behalf of the military, and the models of collective action that they would see on the Civil War, we launched a new era that I like to call Operation National Organizing. This is where wives gather together in a variety of national advocacy groups, and they built on their own for themselves to address issues that directly impacted their lives. Wives during this period used their unique platform to seek solutions to their unique experiences by way of military policies and practices, legislative changes, judicial rulings, they go to the Supreme Court, presidential priorities, and even international agreements. You see this in the story that's featured down the hall here that I was so glad to get to preview. The National League of Families of American Prisoners and Missing in Let me just start that over. National League of Families of American Prisoners and Missing in Southeast Asia, which was a grassroots group of thousands of military spouses who defied official policy that military families could not and should not speak publicly about POWs and MIAs, demanded the attention of the press, legislators, military leaders, and even the President of the United States, and were so influential that when a group of 6 of them met with 4 members of the North Vietnamese delegation in October 1969, a member of the Vietnamese delegation said to one of the founders, Sybil Stockdale, "Oh yes, Mrs. Stockdale, we know who you are and we know about your organization." Working together through the League, military wives from all branches influenced the military, national, and international conversations, not just about POWs, but also about the war itself. And unlike those active in the women's movement, these military wives don't challenge the foundations of the ideal. Rather, they used it to seek aid, to seek policies, and to seek support to help them achieve the demands of the ideal. They were making change from within. And there are so many more examples of military spouses gathering together and forming national organizations to advocate for military, government, and state solutions for their unique issues as military spouses. Here's just a couple that I'll share with you. In 1969, military spouses formed the National Military Wives Association with its main focus of securing benefits for widows of military personnel through law. Their motto was, "Together, we're stronger." In 1981, 400 plus widows from all branches of service formed Survivors of Sacrifice, or SOS. Their primary focus was to help women who were widows lobby for the benefits the government had promised to their husbands when they joined the military. It doesn't stop at the marriage or even at the death in a marriage. In 1981, the Ex-Partners of Service Member for Equality, or EXPOSE, was formed with a primary focus of securing benefits for spouses following divorce. I checked, Nancy Shea was not part of this group. But like others, EXPOSE's reasoning reflected the demands of the Army officer's wife ideal. They said, we dedicated ourselves to their husbands and the military so he could better serve. So we should have rights to these benefits. They took their case all the way to the Supreme Court in 1981 in the case McCarty v. McCarty. One of the McCartys lost. It was the military spouse, and well, ex-spouse at that point. And the Supreme Court ruled that military retirement pay was not community property. But these wives had been through a lot, and they knew not to stop. And so they changed their sights to Congress. They started lobbying, and a year later, in 1982, the Uniformed Services Former Spouses Protection Act passed, which authorized state courts to treat military retirement pay as marital property that could be divided upon divorce. And it provided medical benefits to ex-spouses who had spent 20 years married to an active duty service member. That legislation was a direct result of the advocacy of EXPOSE and an acknowledgement of the significant contributions spouses made to the military. Whether responding to the realities of war or advocating for benefits, military wives built upon those foundational elements I keep telling you about, that they support the mission and boost morale to justify, empower, and embolden their causes. So political and military leaders engage with the issues of military family advocacy organizations raised in unprecedented ways. In engaging with military family issues through advocacy, legislative and military policy changes, and legal challenges, military spouses, military leaders, and politicians paved the way for the emergence of a fully interdependent relationship between the military spouses and the Army. In 1981, for example, which you see here up on your screen, the Army Family Symposium. This was hosted by the Army Officers' Wives Club of Greater Washington area. That's a really powerful Army Officers' Wives Club, by the way. And it was also hosted by the Association of the U.S. Army. We're getting some top leaders to the table. The purpose of it was to identify issues Army spouses had related to their roles in the Army and ask the Army to help them solve those issues. Their slogan, "We recruit soldiers, but we retain families." More than 200 spouses attended the symposium, and attendees asked for assistance with issues that have long been associated with military spouses: deployment, frequent relocation, securing employment for the spouses, and to change the official language the military used to discuss families, replacing dependent with spouse or family member, to counter the idea that wives were a burden to the military, and more accurately represent the work and their significant contributions over all of this time. Within a year of that symposium, the Army Family Life Communications line at the Pentagon opened, and the Army started building the Army Family Liaison Department. Real systemic change happening. Military spouses in all of these groups utilized the very platform that was designed to shape them into what the Army needed, to shape the Army into what they needed. In fact, it is because the foundational elements of the Army officer's wife ideal remained so firmly intact that Army leaders and more responded to their calls and joined them in transforming the institution from within. And that brings us back to General Wickham and the Army Family White Paper. In the cover letter, Wickham says, "A partnership exists between the Army and Army families. The Army's unique missions, concept of service and life, style of its members, all affect the nature of this partnership. Towards the goal of building a strong partnership, the Army remains committed to assuring adequate support to families in order to promote wellness, develop a sense of community, and to strengthen the mutually reinforcing bonds between the Army and its families. Wickham says that the formal articulation of an Army family policy represented a break with the past, or as he later described it, a cultural shift that made taking care of families a priority responsibility of leaders. But in reality, that transformation of the Army from a single man's army to a family institution was the result not just of Wickham or Reagan or the all-volunteer force. It was the result of 4 decades of engagement, of active work with the meaning and the relationship of the Army officer's wife ideal and its relationship to the Army that all took place on this cultural body of sources that we reviewed at a very high level today. So I hope this talk and then your experience going through Missing Men Action helps demonstrate the value of centering military families and studies on the military and helping you see those things that maybe wouldn't be seen otherwise. I want to say thank you so much for this time together, and while I get a sip of water, any questions?
Thank you, Angela. Would you talk a little bit about, or further about the cultivation of the military spouse and their activism in favor of the military, and then just how they kind of turn that on its head, maybe against the intended the intended purpose?
Yeah, well, so, I mean, obviously when you start publishing U.S. Lady Magazine, this monthly prescriptive publication that comes out, you have this opportunity to keep people informed, and you have a need to keep people informed. And so there is not a single edition of that magazine where you don't find people asking you to write to Congress, where they don't celebrate an Army wife for an innovation or a change that she's done, where they don't herald the fact that you're being a positive force outside of the military base with the Cold War. It's in it time and time and time again. They're creating that idea that that's the expectation, that that's what's going to happen there. And there's a really interesting concept called like the revolution of rising expectations, right? So you are telling all these people, you are so important. You have a big voice in Washington. Only you can do this. Now, they were telling them all of that while they were saying, and here's our advice, and follow our advice exactly as you prescribe, right? But you can't just kind of put that genie back in the bottle. You are important. Your voice matters. You can affect change. Well, now when you're facing a problem that you can't get help with because your husband is a prisoner of war or MIA, and you are sure that he is not being treated according to the Geneva Convention, and you know that he needs your help and you can help that way, why are you going to stop? When you've been told that you can change policies and that your voice is important to that, why would you be silent? Your husband is in danger. Why would you stop? And so it was that idea of saying, okay, you should do this, you need to do this, we need you to do this, do it our way. It's that last part that fell off. Hi, Julie.
Hello. A question for the book itself, like from the 40s to the 60s. Was that given to officers' wives? Was it given to enlisted men's wives? And also, was it like the first thing, like, was it at basic training? Or like, when was it given to them? And was it the very first thing that the wife saw?
Yeah, so it doesn't really, there's no real like official handouts that are gonna come to military spouses until you start to go abroad overseas, until that second wave that I talk about. In World War II, it's really informal. Remember at the beginning, it's like, oh, hi, I'm Mary, I'm an officer's wife, and I'm gonna tell you, Julie, exactly what you need to know as you walk into this position now as the senior officer's wife. When the floods come in, it's just a book that's publicized in like popular culture. It's in magazines, it's in newspaper ads, and you see them time and time again. And so people just went out and bought it the same way that you could go to Barnes & Noble or the KU, I don't know that the KU bookstore would have it, but you could go to a local bookstore and look for military spouses for dummies. They have that. You could look for how to be an Army officer's wife. They have that. And so this was just part of that whole prescriptive literature. And someone says, oh, you're a new Army wife? Here's a gift to you. Several copies that I have in my collection. There are no archives for Army officers or Army families at the time that I was doing my research. I don't think that there are now, although somebody should get on that. I would order my books off of eBay, and you would see handwritten notes in the cover of it that would say, you know, this was helpful to me, I hope it's helpful to you. In the Army Family Oral History Project, you have, I don't know why I ever got rid of my book. So it just becomes like a treasured gift, the way that, you know, someone would buy a newlywed cookbook.
And I also have a follow-up question of, you know, in today's world of technology and books aren't as used widely, so this stopped being printed in the 60s. Is there any sort of information for current families or wives, or are families just kind of on their own again?
Oh, no, they're not on their own. Well, first, there's a lot of official government work on it. Our First Lady right now, in her role when she was the Second Lady, did a lot of work with Michelle Obama for supporting military families. You'll see that time and time again from military spouses of actually departments that are in charge of that. There are FRGs and things like that that are family readiness groups and things like that that are available. But a really interesting thing that happens is there's social media. And so there are groups. I'll tell you an example of one. Oh my goodness, it's been a while since I've been in my dissertation, but there is there's a group of, Battling Bear, thank you, I finally got to it. Battling Bear is the name of a group that went viral at some point. And this is kind of early in the conflict in Afghanistan, and spouses are coming back with some severe PTSD. And when wives are calling for help, at the time, if you called for help, the husband could get, or the spouse at this point, we're gonna say spouses because we are now in a whole new era, the spouse, the military spouse could get arrested, right, by the MPs. And so this happened to a woman, and she said, I just wanted to get help for my husband. He has PTSD. How do I do this? And so she does a really radical thing. She takes his gun, his helmet, and she drapes it on, and I think some of his clothing, and drapes it on her body, but she's naked, and she writes on her bare back a poem about being there with him till he's whole, till he can come back, right? And that we don't end, our service to our soldiers doesn't end when they come home, basically. It goes viral, 60 Minutes picks it up, a Facebook page that has, thousands of followers, and it helps push the needle in the military to the idea that PTSD happens, and people deserve to have help with that without becoming criminalized. And so you see that as one example of many, but you can find, type in military spouse on Facebook or any social media, and you'll see a lot. Both really positive groups that come together, and then also some really defamatory things people will say towards people that they still want to craft as dependents.
Thank you. I nodded several times for you there because I was a military wife. But I came at a time where things kind of changed because we used to always have, my husband's an officer, and we used to always have a luncheon once a month. And we took turns of, if you were the junior, you eventually moved up to. And at one point I was president of the Officer Wives Club. But the interesting thing was I started working on my master's, and then I went on for my PhD, so therefore I couldn't do an afternoon one. And it was the colonel's wife who was, the commander. And they decided, well, we'll have a night coffee. Mm-hmm. And the women decided on that. And then there were a lot of other women had to work. So therefore, they couldn't come during the daytime. And for the older ones, that was unusual because they worked in their home and not outside. But those changes really came about because of people not being able to show up or asked, could we change what it was? I never heard of the Army wife.
You didn't?
The whole time I was there, I never saw one. I never heard of it. It was never discussed. Wow. Or anything. So I think it might have been in some circles, but that's why I'm looking at this thinking, I'm going to have to go and see, does anybody I know have the Army wife, because we didn't, and so there were lots of different changes, even to what kind of things we discussed.
For sure.
We talked about domestic violence at one of our settings, so that probably would have been against the Army wife, along those lines, and the fact that there was a draft. And most people today say, what's a draft? And so that was one of it. So it was very different in terms of, I don't know what they do now because we're not, but we became very close with each other, your children, where you lived. But if your husband was shipped to Korea and that's what you called a undesirable tour, you couldn't go. But you have to move off the Army post. We found that with the Missing in Action. That's how Schilling Manor got started in Salina. Yeah. So there were lots of little changes that really happened, but I never ever had a book. And my father was a master sergeant in the Army, so she was the Army wife, but I never heard of that book.
Well, may I
but
ask
now you have me curious.
So I have two things to that. One, thank you for your service as a military spouse. And two, were the foundational elements that you heard, because obviously there are a ton of different handbooks and ideas, but were the ideas that your role was to help support readiness and boost morale, did that still resonate in the time that you served as a military spouse?
Probably, but we never discussed it.
Wow. Yeah.
But I don't think it was any different than if you get married now and you have a partner, you try to make sure that you're being supportive of what career they have. The difference is now men often move with the woman. that wouldn't have happened. But the fact that you have more women now in the military on all ranks, and you have generals, and you have colonels, and you have all of that, I think that would change, because then the role changes, because women now see men and women in that role. So then the question is, what's the role of the male, of the wife that's the full colonel?
Yep, I read in a few of the oral histories that if in those early years of a female military member and a male spouse, that the female military member would be asked to do things by the wives' clubs before the male spouse, who was the civilian, would.
Yeah,
And that also changes over time, but it's, institutions can be slow to change.
but that was very interesting, and I thank you very much for it.
Well, thank
I
you.
probably was not the typical Army wife, but, it was, but then I was with other women that weren't either,
Yeah, yeah.
and so I think
It's an ideal.
that
Very
was
few
different.
people
Now, I
actually were
absolutely
exactly
loved it.
this.
I really enjoyed it.
Oh.
It was sort of like, and we were pretty independent, but I think to answer something you said, it depended on the spouse of the commanding officer. I think if maybe she was a little more rigid, it probably would have affected you. But the three that I can think of, they were like cool. And actually I got the impression they ran their household. He may have run the office, but she took of everything that happened right there. And I think it might have made it easier for us because they were very strong women.
Yeah, a good person in leadership makes all the difference in the world. Thank you.
So, fantastic presentation today. I enjoyed it so much. I was just curious, in your reading of Lady Magazine, or maybe in the Army's Wife book, what were some of the most cringeworthy by today's standards pieces of advice, like some of the worst advice that would just make us kind of roll our eyes today, especially as women?
Oh, well, I mean, a lot of this is also just characteristic of the time, but in World War II, they were advocating for wives to go work, and that was really exciting. So when I read the post-World War II one, I was really bummed to see, they always call it Ted as the spouse. The only excuse for an Army officer's wife to work is to take care of an aged or ill parent. It is not, it's not cricket for your husband to accept a slapdash sort of housekeeping. So that one was particularly hard. In the 1940s, when they're telling you, the home is your place, right? If you're having a party and your husband happens to be a good cook in the kitchen, you're supposed to celebrate that and surrender all to him to get to be the host. So even in her domain, she was supposed to take that away. So you'd see a lot of things like that. But I think more than anything, what I saw in there was really just this incredible conversation around an idea of what people wanted, both the military wanted and what the spouse wanted, and how that talk around an idea ultimately could change big systems.
I know you did a lot of work for Army Wife, but is there other branches of the military also have books like this?
Oh yeah, Nancy Shea also wrote The Navy Wife, and there are ones for specific spouse or for specific branches of the military. There are pamphlets for specific branches of the military, and then there are ones that are kind of more generalists about it, like for all military spouses.
Do you know anything about Nancy Shea, the author, her personal background or anything like that, with the exception of how her marriage ended? But
Yeah,
I think it would make a great miniseries,
Yeah, I think Nancy Shea would be an incredible person to really dive into the history. She had strong opinions. Her husband, Augustus Shea, or Augustine Shea, it's been 5 years on the dissertation, so pardon me. If you'd like to read it, I'll send you a copy. But she married a West Point cadet, so right, that's exactly the type of world you would imagine. You're kind of being groomed through those West Point visits. She was a senior officer's wife. She believed in the system she was putting out, and so I would imagine she would not have been your favorite commanding officer's wife on post, that she would have demanded that people followed it. She would even have requirements that you would wear white gloves while going on a plane overseas in the 50s with your children to go to foreign bases. So she seemed unwavering in her expectations and quick to blame those who could not meet it. So that is my impression on her of reading her advice. But and she goes on, she actually writes some articles in US Lady magazine as well. So her platform is as the authority. And so maybe there's a fun side, but she was kind of like the Martha Stewart of the military. It's like, this is the way you do it, and obviously it's so easy, right? I still can't fold a fitted sheet. I've watched Martha Stewart's video so many times.
Well, then let me follow up on that because that's interesting. All of this would have been done before 1980 in the women's movement. And that would have had a big bearing on what really happened. Yeah. But when you said military, West Point, could that also in your study have determined the type of man that they married and how strong military was it? Because I have known 3 different generals, and they are not the same.
No.
They're very different in terms of how they interact, what they do, how they do a command, and everything else. So did you find that that would have had a bearing on what the women would have done at that time before women's movement?
I mean, I think the women's movement definitely had an impact on the wives. I mean, it gave you a model for what national organizing and your voice could do. I think that the movements in general that were happening in the 60s through to today have also transformed the military itself. It's why you see different ways of generals manifesting. It's why you see different types of people serving as generals. And so that's going to allow us to get away from this like single lane focus on what is allowed to this idea that there are many ways to serve, to lead, and to be an Army wife.
Yeah, and I say especially now when you have the men being led by the 3-star woman.
I know.
You know, and that's a big difference in terms of what happens and the ranks and how they come in. And if anything, if you look at the Army Times, which my husband still gets, it's really interesting to see how that has changed all the way to the pay scale, to how it happens, the role ROTC plays in, how much you come in when you're paid, which is really an interesting one as well. So for some people, they only know command under a woman.
Yeah.
And because it's all volunteer Army, there's a different kind of person you get. Instead of you must come and you have to serve, you choose to serve.
Yes.
And you get a bonus to re-enlist. So it's totally different, right?
Yeah. And it's always fascinating to me to watch this institution go through such dynamic change, including the transformation to the all-volunteer force during this time period, because it's just, it ends up opening the path to just so many different ways, again, of leading, of being in the military. And in my incredibly biased view, I do think that considering the entire soldier, including his family or her family or their family, is critical to building a better and stronger military. Well, all right. Well, thank you again, and I hope that you will always take time to see the exhibit down the hall. It's really lovely. Congratulations to the Dole.